As Nelson Mandela once said, that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. But for education to truly transform lives, it requires well-crafted policies that address the needs of the students, educators, and society as a whole. Good day, everyone. My heartfelt greetings to you, Teacher F, and I hope everyone is doing good today. By the way, my name is Anna Marie Ibay, and together with Miss Michelle T. Tanalon and Mr. Samson P. Pancho Jr., we will be discussing about the topic 2, which is the policy formulation in education. We will be discussing about the stakeholders, the processes, and the institutions. And today, we will explore how educational policies are formulated, the key stakeholders involved, and the processes that shape decision making. By understanding these aspects, we gain insights into how education systems evolve and how we, as educators and citizens, can contribute to meaningful reforms. So, before we dwell on our first topic, here are the lesson objectives for today. First is we will be able to learn how the educational policies are developed, including the influence of the stakeholders such as the government agencies, legislators, educators, students, and the private sector. Next is we will be able to know the participatory process of policy formulation and the political, social, and economic factors that shape decision making. Education policies in the Philippines play a crucial role in shaping the country's educational landscape. The policy formulation and decision-making involve careful considerations. Now, let's have a quick recap about policy and policy formulation. So what is a policy? Policy is a principle or rule to guide decisions and achieve rational outcomes. So these are principles designed to direct decisions and achieve specific goals. So in education, policies ensure that learning environments remain structured, equitable, and aligned with national and global standards. Now let's proceed to policy formulation. Alright, so policy formulation is the process of developing these guidelines. So it is a crucial aspect of governance that involves the systemic development and establishment of principles, guidelines, and actions to address specific issues and particular objectives. And it involves identifying challenges in education system, analyzing solutions, and designing strategies that address the needs of the students, teachers, and communities. Now that we understand what policies and policy formulation mean, the next question is who shapes these policies? Educational policy formulation is not the work of a single person or entity. It involves various stakeholders who bring different perspectives and expertise. Now, let's explore these key players and their roles in shaping education policies. These are the stakeholders that are involved in policy formulation. We have government agencies, the legislators, educators, students and parents, and lastly, the private sectors. So what are the rules in formulating policies? So let me discuss first about the government agencies. So these agencies are responsible for designing, implementing, and overseeing the education policies. So in the Philippines, we have three agencies, which are the Department of Education, or also known as DepEd. So they are responsible for managing the basic education. Next is we have the Commission on Higher Education, or the CHED, which oversees higher education. And lastly is the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, or also known as a TESDA, which regulates vocational and technical training. So these agencies ensure that the educational programs meet national standards and address the needs of students and teachers. Next, we have legislators. While government agencies implement policies, the legislators play a crucial role in crafting and passing laws that shape the education system. They also allocate budget for education and influence policy direction through public hearings and oversight. The senators and congressmen and other policymakers draft and pass legislation that defines education reforms. For example, the K-12 law, which is the Republic Act of 10533 in the Philippines, which extended basic education from 10 to 12 years. So this law was passed by the lawmakers after careful deliberation and consultations with stakeholders. The third is the educators and the academic institutions. So the teachers, principals, administrators, and education researchers provide practical feedback about what works or not in school. So they are the forefront of education. They provide first-hand insights into what policies work and what needs improvement. So, for example, the teachers' unions in many countries have advocated for better working conditions, professional development programs, and curriculum improvements to enhance student learning. Now we have the students and parents. So as direct beneficiaries, they give ground level feedback on curriculum, facilities, and learning experiences. The student councils and the parents associations are invited in consultations. Since the students and parents are the heart of the education system, their voices play a crucial role in shaping policies. Since students are the primary beneficiaries of education, their experiences and feedback help policymakers design relevant and effective reforms. Meanwhile, the parents advocate for their children's right to quality education, often pushing for improvements in curriculum, learning resources, and school facilities. So, an example here is the Parent-Teacher Association, or the PTA, actively engages in discussions about the school funding, the student welfare, and curriculum development. Their feedback helps shape policies that directly impact school communities. And lastly, we have the private sector and civil society. So beyond government and educators, the private sector and civil society also play a vital role in policy formulation. So the private schools, the NGOs, and education focused foundations influence reform through pilot programs, lobbying, and funding. So they contribute to education by funding programs, providing resources, and lobbying for policy changes. So here are examples. So the Adopt a School program allows private companies to invest in public schools by providing infrastructure, technology, and also training for teachers. And lastly, the NGOs, or the non-government organizations, and also the advocacy groups influence education policies by conducting research, advocating for marginalized students, and pushing for inclusive education reforms. As we can see, policy formulation in education is a shared responsibility. The government agencies, legislators, educators, students, parents, and the private sectors all contribute to shaping policies that define the quality and accessibility of education. Understanding the rules helps us see how collaboration leads to better policies that respond to the needs of learners and society as a whole. Next, let's explore the step-by-step process of how these stakeholders come together to develop and implement education policies, which will be discussed by Ms. Michelle D. Tanelan. And that's all for my report. Once again, this is Anna Marie's Evi. And thank you for listening.
Everyone. I'm Michelle Tanilon and I'm here to discuss all about the policy formulation process in the Philippines. So the process of developing educational policies is systematic and structured to ensure that policies effectively address the needs of the education sector. So the first step is we have problem identifications. Issues in education sector are identified such as curriculum gaps, lack of resources, or low student performance. So the first step involves recognizing challenges within the education system. This could be issues such as outdated curricula, inadequate teacher training, insufficient resources, or declining student performance. So identifying these problems is crucial because policies should be targeted at addressing specific gaps and improving education quality. So the next one is the agenda setting. So the issues gains attention from policymakers, leading to discussions on potential reforms. So once a problem is identified, it must gain the attention of decision makers such as government officials, education boards, and other stakeholders. So this phase involves decisions, research presentations, and lobbying efforts to ensure that issue becomes a priority for policy maker. The third one is the policy design. So experts draft possible solutions or incorporating research findings, stakeholder consultations, and best practices. So experts, researchers, and policymakers collaborate to draft potential solutions. This stage involves reviewing existing research, studying successful models from other regions or countries, and incorporating input from the key stakeholders, including teachers, students, and parents. And the aim is to design a policy that is evidence-based, practical, and capable of achieving the desired outcomes. Next one, we have the consultation and advocacy. So public consultation and debates are conducted to refine policy proposal. So before finalizing a policy, it undergoes a consultation phase where different stakeholders such as educators, school administrators, parents, and community leaders are given a chance to provide feedback. So public debate, forums, and discussions help refine the policy, ensuring it aligns with the needs and expectations of education sector. So advocacy efforts also play a role in gaining public and political support for the proposed policy. Next one is we have the policy approval. So the policy is formalized through legislation, executive orders, or administrative guidelines. So once refined, the policy is submitted for approval through the appropriate channels such as legislative bodies, executive orders, or administrative agencies. Approval grants the policy legal backing, so ensuring it is recognized and enforceable within the education system. So after approval, the policy is put into action. Schools, educators, and relevant institutions are responsible for executing the policy. So this stage involves all allocating resources, training personnel, and ensuring that all necessary measures are in place to achieve the policy's goal. So second to the last one is the evaluation and review. So policymakers assess the effectiveness of the policy and make necessary adjustments. So policymakers regularly assess the effectiveness of the policy by gathering data, analyzing results, and reviewing feedback from stakeholders. So if a policy is not achieving its intended outcomes, modification may be made to improve its impact. So the last one is the feedback and continuous improvement. So establishing mechanisms for ongoing feedback from stakeholders. So a crucial part of the process is establishing mechanisms for ongoing feedback. So stakeholders, including teachers, students, and administrators should have channels to report challenges and suggest some improvements. So continuous assessment ensures that policies remain relevant, effective, and adaptable to changing educational needs. So by following this structured approach, educational policies can be developed and implemented successfully, leading to meaningful improvements in education sector. So again, I'm Michelle Tanilon. I'm here to discuss the policy formulation process in the Philippines. And that would be all. Thank you for listening.
As David L. Cooper said, education policy isn't just about rules, it's about shaping the future of individuals and society. Good morning, everyone, especially to you, Teacher F. I hope you're all doing well today. I am Samson P. Pancho Jr., and it's a pleasure to be here with you all to discuss the final topic of our group. As a transition from Ms. Tanelun's topic on the policy formulation process, it's now time to highlight how the participatory nature of that process plays a significant role. Education is the foundation of progress, and the way policies are shaped determines how effectively our educational systems can meet the needs of society. But how exactly are these policies created? And why is it essential to include diverse voices in that process? Today, we will explore the importance of participatory governance in education policy formulation and discuss the political, social, and economic factors that influence how education policies are crafted in the Philippines. There are various participatory mechanisms that make policies more inclusive and responsive to the needs of diverse communities. These mechanisms allow stakeholders such as teachers, students, parents, and local government units to actively contribute to shaping education policies. And the first mechanism is town hall consultations. Town halls provide an open forum for citizens to engage directly with policymakers. Unlike smaller, localized meetings, town halls involve a broader audience, allowing for more inclusive feedback. And these consultations are typically held in public spaces like community centers or schools. For example, in 2022 to 2023, the Department of Education conducted town halls to gather feedback on the implementation plan of the Matatag curriculum. And these sessions included teachers, students, parents, and LGUs, ensuring the curriculum addressed regional and cultural needs. Okay, next we have the focus group discussions or the FGDs. So FGDs are more structured and allow for in-depth feedback on specific issues. Unlike town halls, FGDs are smaller and more targeted, involving selected groups like students, teachers, or indigenous peoples communities or IPs for detailed discussions. For instance, CHED organized FGDs with state universities and private higher education institutions to revise the general education curriculum, ensuring that it meet the needs of both public and private institutions. And following that, online surveys and feedback forms. Online surveys and feedback forms are more broad-reaching tools that are effective for gathering data from a larger population, especially those unable to attend in-person consultations. So, surveys provide both quantitative and qualitative insights, making them ideal for understanding a public opinion on a wide scale. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, DepEd used surveys to collect feedback on learning preferences between online and modular learning, which helped shape the blended learning strategy that was later adopted. And lastly, the multi-stakeholder advisory councils. So, multi-stakeholder advisory councils, such as local school boards and shared technical panels, bring together diverse representatives from education, government, and the private sector. So, these councils offer advice and ensure policies reflect the varied needs of different stakeholders. For example, local boards actively involve stakeholders in consultations to ensure educational policies meet the challenges of schools at the local level, ensuring that decisions are informed by a wide range of perspectives. So, in conclusion, these participatory mechanisms, ranging from town hall consultations to multi-stakeholder advisory councils, has a role in shaping education policy. While town halls gather broad public input, FGDs offer more focused discussions. Surveys collect widespread feedback, and advisory councils bring expert advice to ensure policies are well rounded and effective. Together, these mechanisms ensure that policies are inclusive, practical, and responsive to the needs of all communities. As we have discussed, involving various voices is essential in shaping education policies that work. Now, let's explore why this participation is so important. Because when stakeholders are included in the policy making process, it ensures that policies are transparent, responsive, and equitable. So, here's why participation matters. So, first is it encourages transparency and accountability because when more people are involved during the formulation of the policy, policy decisions are made openly and policymakers are held accountable for their actions and choices. So the second one is it makes policies responsive and equitable because diverse perspectives ensure that policies can address the needs of all communities, making education more inclusive and responsive to everyone. And lastly, it builds ownership and trust. So, when stakeholders are involved in developing policies, especially those directly impacted by them, they feel more connected to the policy success. This trust helps smooth the way for successful implementation of that policy. However, education policies in the Philippines are also shaped by a range of factors that influence both the speed and effectiveness of their implementation. These factors include political, social, and economic influences, all of which have significant impacts on policy formulation and execution. Let's begin with political factors. Education policy in the Philippines is heavily influenced by the ideologies and priorities of the ruling government. For instance, the government stance on issues such as power, citizenship, and democracy shapes how education policies are formulated. So, for example, a conservative government might streamline curriculums to focus on core subjects, while a liberal government might focus on social justice and inclusion in education. So, this factor arises with questions like How do changes in administration influence the implementation of education reforms, such as revising curriculums or prioritizing foundational skills? So, an example of this is the shift in leadership under DepEd Secretary Sara Duterte. During her tenure, there was a strong emphasis on revising the K-12 curriculum, particularly focusing on strengthening foundational skills. However, this focus has since shifted under the current administration. As I have observed, achieving continuity in educational reforms is difficult due to political factors. Each administration tends to introduce new priorities, often diverting from previous initiatives. So this reflects how political transitions directly influence policy formulation, where decisions are shaped by leadership changes, political agendas, and shifting national priorities rather than a sustained long-term educational vision. Now, let's move on to social factors. The diverse backgrounds of Filipino students demand that education systems to be inclusive. So social pressures push policymakers to ensure equal educational opportunities while promoting diversity, multiculturalism, and inclusivity in schools. So this factor arises with questions like how can the education system accommodate the diverse social cultural backgrounds of Filipino students? Another question is what policies ensure inclusivity for marginalized groups such as those with disabilities or different gender identities? So the example for those questions is this one. So policies like the mother tongue based multilingual education or the MTB is crucial because this policy aligned with Republic Act 103533 that mandates to the use of the mother tongue as the medium of instruction in early education. It ensures that children are taught in a language that they are most familiar with, which enhances learning, especially in the early years. In addition to MTB-MLE, policies such as the Inclusive Education Act for Learners with Disabilities or the RA 11650, it emphasizes the provision of quality education for children with disabilities, ensuring that they are not left behind in an inclusive educational environment. Finally, let's address the economic factors. Economic development, resource availability, and funding priorities significantly determine how much financial investment is made in education. Because without financial resources, many education policies cannot be fully implemented. And this factor arises with questions like how do economic constraints influence policy formulation and the allocation of resources for education? And what should be prioritized when there is a budget limitation? Would it be the infrastructure, educational materials, or teacher training? The example that will relate to these questions is during the implementation, or I mean the before the implementation of the K to 12 program, because one of the major concerns was whether there were enough funds to build new infrastructures, hire new teaching staff, and supply the necessary resources for schools. And actually, the same challenge applies now with the revisions under the K to 12 program or with the emergence of the Matatag agenda. And the same questions emerge like are there enough funds to produce new learning materials like print textbooks and hire additional educators? Because actually, until now, there are still no available textbooks for the grade 7 or even teachers manuals. That's why, when crafting a policy, the government must first assess available funds and prioritize which needs to address first, considering budget constraints. For instance, policymakers may have to choose between allocating funds for new school buildings or investing updated textbooks and learning materials. This is why financial planning is a critical part of educational policy development. So, in summary, political, social, and economic factors all play a crucial role in shaping educational landscape. In the Philippines, these factors determine not only the direction of education reforms but also how effective these reforms can be implemented. And as we move forward, understanding the interconnection between these factors will help us better navigate and anticipate the future of education policy in our country. That's it. But before I end my presentation, allow me to reiterate this quote from David L. Cooper. It says, policy is the art of turning vision into reality. So this emphasizes that policy formulation in the education is more than just drafting guidelines. It is about transforming ideas into concrete actions that shape learning environments, improve teaching methodologies, and enhance student outcomes. So a well-crafted education policy requires careful analysis, stakeholder collaboration, and strategic implementation to ensure that visionary goals translate into meaningful, lasting change in the education system. Once again, this has been your presenter, Samson P. Pancho Jr. Thank you so much for listening.